Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Combat Zone, where the enemy only has 4 things to say. Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender. We surrender. No, really, we do. That's what this show is all about. Driving them into the ground. Gotta love it.
Sounded more like the show is all about Nick having fun with his voice. Okay, I was trying to do, we got that. Now you confused me, Nick, because anyway, it's all taken care of.
I had my laptop speaker on. I forgot to mute it.
Right, don't forget, turn the sound down, Nick. Turn the sound down.
It's taken care of. Believe me, the show is in good hands.
That's the first thing they tell you, right? To turn the sound down on your radio when you call in.
That's right. I only had to use that a few times. Most people, at least for my show, were smart enough to know that.
By the way, I'm Joe. He's Nick. No, you got to turn the sound down, Nick.
I did turn the sound down. Oh, I know what happened. I hadn't clicked off it, so when I scrolled the mouse, it turned it back on.
Oh, that's just too...
I'm not that technical.
That's just too technical for me.
I'm telling you, man, you're way out on the edge there when you're starting to do stuff like that.
What's the date today?
Today is...
April 24th. Today's April the 24th.
Yes, it is. See, they got year, then they got month, then they got day. I always put a day, month, year.
Anyway, welcome to the show.
Yes.
Our number to call, in case you want to join the conversation live, toll free anywhere in North America, 844-415-2115, 415-2115. But, of course, you knew that because you're listening on our website.
And all this time...
And please and thank you, guys. Don't just listen. Participate in the chat room.
And all this time, I thought it was fee-faw, fee-faw, fee-faw.
Okay, you're doing it again, Nick.
Either that or... You remember Junior Samples?
No.
You don't remember Junior Samples?
No, who's that?
He was a car salesman on Hee Haw. And his phone number...
Hee Haw.
His phone number was BR549. Come on down to Junior Samples Car Sales. And the fender would fall off the car he's leaning on.
Okay.
You don't remember that?
If you're on YouTube, you can look up the show Hee Haw. And the reason why it was called Hee Haw. Yeah, that was like the theme song, right?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, it was a country, kind of a bluegrass show, right?
Variety
was it
show,
an hour or an hour and a half?
Probably an hour.
Sorry, not an hour and a half.
And they would always take one little town, population 57, like Bucktooth, Idaho, or something like that. And they would go, "Here, Hee Haw salutes Bucktooth, Idaho, population 14 when the dog is home."
Right.
Salute. I'm making that up. I don't know if there's a Bucktooth, Idaho, but that sounds something more out of Virginia than
something like
Idaho.
That.
Nothing against my friends in New Virginia. I would never...
Or your friends in Idaho.
Or my friends. Actually, I'll tell you a real quick story before we dive into the meat of this. I have a little joke I tell when I'm really bored. And when I was driving truck across at Buffalo, and trucks go through customs a little bit differently than cars do. So I pulled up to the booth, and I handed him my manifest because in the 10 years I drove truck, I never once showed my license. All they wanted to see was my manifest. So I gave it to him, and he has seen 150 trucks in the last hour. He's bored out of his mind. So am I. I just drove 700 or 800 miles to get there. So while he's going through it, I said, "Do you know what they call 32 hillbillies sitting around a kitchen table?" And he never cracked a smile. He looked over at me and he said, "What?" And I said, "A full set of teeth." And he didn't even flinch. And he said, "Do you know where Roanoke, West Virginia is?" And I went, "Uh-oh." I said, "Yeah, yes, sir." He said, "That's where me and my people is from." And he said it in that accent.
But I wouldn't say that was hillbilly country.
Roanoke, you ever been to Roanoke, West Virginia?
As a matter of fact, I have.
Oh, my good Lord.
I still wouldn't call it hillbilly country.
Virginia, West Virginia, Roanoke. Oh, yeah.
You
hillbilly
think so?
Central.
Really?
Anyway.
Okay, look, hold it.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on to your seat.
Okay.
Because I know we wanted to talk about something serious.
We do.
In the first half hour.
We do.
But okay, and we will. But stupid people
doing really stupid things. Yeah, that was me.
Okay, so tonight we're going to open the show. We're not going to there's lots of things to talk about. We're going to talk about the situation in Sri Lanka and the persecution of Christians worldwide. That's a serious topic.
It is very.
We are going to talk about man-made causes of spring flooding that have nothing to do with the climate. We're going to talk about all kinds of things. But before we get into any of that, Nick, this is very serious. The president of the Philippines has threatened that if Canada does not retrieve its garbage that it has sent to the Philippines for processing and disposal, that he is going to declare war on Canada.
I'll tell you what, that's a threat to be considered. First of all, look who is running the country over here.
Well,
Justin Trudeau.
It's funny because Fox News is predicting that in any armed conflict between the Philippines and Canada, that the Philippines will be crushed by Canada.
Oh, my God.
And even goes on to list some of our allies in the Fox News story, Great Britain, Australia, and France.
Yeah,
it's funny how they forgot the United States.
Yeah, funny that.
Okay, yeah, well, because the Americans don't consider us allies. They just consider us an
neighbors.
Appendage, okay?
Yeah, they're just neighbors.
Right. Yeah, they're not really allies. We just look after them.
That's right.
Right, that's which is probably not, it's not entirely fair, but I can understand where they would be coming from on that. Okay?
But
but the assumption here, I think, Nick, is that Prime Minister Trudeau is going to be able to assemble a coalition of the willing to defend us against the armed attack.
Philippine aggression.
Coming from the Philippines.
Well, never mind the absurdity of going to war over garbage.
Well, it's funny because, I don't think the Canadians know that, we're always talking about recycling and we're always talking about landfill, but we're also shipping garbage, apparently, to the Philippines.
Yeah, because China won't take it anymore.
Right.
Well, this happened before the Chinese shut their borders to it, but this happened in 2013 and 14. A private firm mislabeled, accidentally, air quotes, over 120, almost 130 containers of garbage. Now, the Filipinos did process about 27 of them, and there's 103 of them left, and they're full of things like adult diapers and just some really nasty stuff.
How do you know adult diapers?
Because it says so in the article.
Oh, okay. You read the article.
I once in a while I do that. Anyway, the point is that the solution to this is for Justin Trudeau to go, oops, sorry, and to lease a container ship, because a container ship, any modern container ship, can carry a lot more than 103 containers. So
these are ocean-going shipping containers.
Yeah. 40 feet long, 8 feet high, 8 feet wide.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, just rent one of those and go pick them up. They're our problem.
But how did this happen? What's the background to this?
The Filipinos had agreed to take some garbage from us.
Okay.
But nothing that was nasty, nothing of the toxic variety. And it was a lot of stuff was supposed to be recycled and all that sort of thing. But when they finally opened the containers, they found it was full of all kinds of stuff they didn't want. And under the name of a treaty or a convention that Canada's signatory to, whose name I can't remember at the moment, Canada's not allowed to do that. That breaks international law. So Duarte, the quasi-dictator of the Philippines, has had enough. The stuff has been sitting in these containers rotting since 2014, which makes it 5 years now. And he basically told Canada, said, come and get it, take it back. If you don't take it back, we're going to send it back, and you can eat it for all I care. And in this case, I'm siding with him. Now, he's not the nicest guy in the world. He is very much brutal. His war on drugs has cost about 12,000 lives. His anti-terrorism war is just as bloody. This guy's not a nice guy. But in this instance, he's actually right. Because the private company that sent this garbage over like I said, mislabeled or accidentally mislabeled the contents of the container. Now, I don't believe they mislabeled it. I think they thought they could get away with it, and it's been gone for 5 years. So what the Canadian government ought to do is pick up the garbage and then bill that company for whatever it costs us to go and get it. And if they won't pay it, drag them into court. Because you don't go to war over garbage. By the way, I don't really think we'd actually go to war with the Philippines in a real shooting war anyway.
No, but it's an interesting question, because what happens if, in fact, they do declare war on Canada? Do we just sort of ignore them, or do we just sort of laugh at them?
Yeah, pretty much. I would say, come and get us.
So we're not going to send the Navy over?
Well, even if we did.
A couple of gunships?
Even now, all we'd have to do is send one submarine. That's all we'd have to do, and we could bottle up their whole Navy. But
what we should do is we should have them load all that garbage
on a container ship and then sink it halfway across,
and then sink it in
Filipino waters.
Filipino waters, right?
Well, yeah, but you know what? Look, the logistics of actually the Philippines declaring war on Canada and then prosecuting a shooting war are just so ridiculous. Like, they don't have any combat aircraft. They do not have an aircraft carrier. They do not have a blue water navy. They do not have any means of doing anything more than putting up some kind of defense against any foreign aggression.
But neither does the Philippines.
That's what I'm talking about. Ha, 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 ha. No. You know what? We
yes, of course, we have more than they do.
We do. But nobody, can you imagine the reaction in Canada if we said, fine, we'll meet you out there at latitude, longitude, whatever.
A second battle of Leyte Gulf.
There you go. We'll go and slug it out with you. People in Canada would go crazy. They'd lose their minds over it. You don't go to war over garbage.
No, I understand that, but that's not entirely up to us.
No, you're right.
The president of the Philippines is threatening to declare war on Canada.
Well, if he declares war on Canada, then the best strategy is to say, then fine, come and get us. Because what's he going to do?
Of course, once he declares war, then we have no longer any obligation to take that garbage back.
Oh, that's a thought.
I think we should just let him declare war. In fact, I don't think we should just let him. I think we should be encouraging him to declare war.
Well, see, the thing is, if he loads his stuff on a tanker or on a cargo ship and sends it, say to he's closer to Vancouver than he is to Halifax, so he sends it to the port of Vancouver. Now what?
Well, we just don't let it in.
That's not going to happen either.
Well, of course it's not going to happen, but
look, it's an interesting academic exercise. Trudeau, first of all, has no idea how to deal with this.
Yeah, because you and your Trudeau, you're just obsessed with...
he's the head of the country now.
No, that's true.
Right? The Governor General actually is, but he's the acting head of the country.
Well, the Queen is, but...
Yeah, okay, fine. But the point is that if he can't handle a trade dispute with the United States, how in God's name would he ever prosecute a real shooting war? He hasn't got the foggiest idea. So the best thing that could happen is for Duarte to put him in a corner, and I'm thinking from their point of view because I'm on their side on this. Duarte sends the container ship over and says, now what are you going to do? Now, I know what I would do. I would rest it at the edge of the harbor, remove the crew, put a Canadian crew on it, and send it back and pick them up with a Sea King that one of our CPFs brings along, and drop anchor in Filipino waters and leave it there.
Well, you see, I'm much more belligerent than you are on this, I think.
Well, I just don't see this.
I think we should launch a preemptive strike.
A preemptive strike. Sink all their containers before they put them on the boat.
Well, why? Look, tell the guy. Here's my plan. Okay, my plan is, first of all, we communicate with the president with President Duarte through back channels. Okay, so and what we do is we tell him to take all of the garbage containers from Canada, put them in an isolated place somewhere away from the general public, and then we launch a preemptive strike against those garbage containers.
Well, it would make interesting
just destroy
target
them and
practice.
incinerate them, and then declare victory and go home.
Well, it would make interesting target practice for the Air Force, that's for sure. But the question then becomes, how do we get our fighters over there?
Oh, now, why would you ask that question, Nick?
Because I'm thinking of the logistics of actually doing some of this stuff. Well, we do have air-to-air refueling capability. So we probably could do it, but, I don't know. I don't know enough about what the range of the F-18s are.
Well, as Fox News rightly points out, we are allies of Australia. Maybe we could get landing rights in Australia.
Hey,
we could
listen,
stage an
maybe
attack
you've
from
got
there.
something. They just sold us a bunch of worn-out jets. Why wouldn't they give us a place to land?
I don't know.
Oh, man, this is just crazy. This is, look, folks, we're just being silly, really. There's
No, this is okay. No, this is serious. This is serious business. President Duarte has really. This is not an invention, folks. Okay, we are on the brink of war with the Philippines over garbage, and it's not an invention. This is for real. It may be silly, but it's for real, and we should always take this stuff seriously. War is no laughing matter, Nick.
That's true. It's not. That's why I'm trying to be a little bit rational about this. But, I don't blame the Filipinos for this, even though Duarte is not a nice guy. In the court of international law, Canada loses. So from a pragmatic point of view, Trudeau should just say, oops, I'm sorry, send over a container ship, pick him up and bring him back.
Now, how long ago did this garbage get over there?
It's been there for 5 years.
So this happened on the Harper Watch.
Yes, it did.
Right.
Now, actually, in a way, it doesn't matter because it's been there, and Trudeau knows about it, and has known about it for a while, and he still hasn't done anything.
Yeah, I don't know. Here's my question. My question is, why are we sending garbage over there in the first place? And I think that's a serious question. I mean, it just goes to show again, we're so stuck up, we're so sure of ourselves, we're arrogant, we're smug about how we care for the environment, and we're very careful about how we're going to ban straws in restaurants. And
the hypocrisy and the absurdity of it all is almost too much to swallow.
Yeah, I don't look. You produce the garbage, process it here. I don't believe that we should be sending garbage over to any other country. And I love the environment. I love clean air, clean land, clean water. Okay,
right.
But we are the second largest country in the world, and we have a minuscule, minute population given the size of the country. Now, I'm not advocating for more landfill sites here, but let's face it, okay? It's not like we're running out of room to bury our garbage.
Well, you don't even have to bury it. There is high-efficiency incineration.
Yeah, I'm all for incinerators.
So am I. So we don't even have to bury it. It comes down to, and this is a problem that has tentacles that reach a lot further than the Philippines. Why are we still shipping garbage overseas? And I'm repeating what you said, but when we look at the way we deal with garbage, we haven't changed it since we got kicked out of the garden. Okay, it's been basically put it in a pile and bury it for...
You're referring to the Garden of Eden here,
I am. Because Adam was a good husband and listened to his wife, and we've been paying the price for that ever since.
That's a very Catholic thing for you to say.
Well, he likes sleeping indoors. It's a pragmatic thing to say.
Okay.
I mean, when Eve says to Adam, honey, could you... Of course he's going to say, yes, dear. Just have a little bite. I want to share everything with you. He said, yes, dear. And we know what happened after that. They ended up wearing fig leaves. Anyway, to get back to this, ever since then, we've been burying our garbage. And the bottom line is, why? We can put men on the moon. We can send missions to Mars. We can do all kinds of technological things that boggle the imagination. And yet we're still burying our garbage. What kind of They just, I don't get it.
Okay, fair enough, Nick. Fair enough. I'm all in favor of incinerating garbage. I think that the technology is good. It's environmentally sound. It's clean. We're not doing anything, I think, that harms the environment when we do incineration. And in fact, there are places where people absolutely refuse to allow incineration. But it's important to know that there are many places in Canada, and there are many places here in Ontario, where we actually do have incinerators.
Vaughan comes to
it's
mind.
it's not a question of the government having passed legislation or the provincial environmental protection agency or whatever the environmental impact studies that are being done are saying, no, you can't incinerate garbage. We can have permits issued for garbage incineration. So I'm all in favor of it. But I just can't help but make the observation that if we didn't want to do incineration, if we wanted to do landfill, it's not like we're running out of places to do landfill. So, at some point in time, you have to find some kind of a compromise between maintaining the pristine character of the environment and allowing for human expansion and human progress. And when I talk about, perhaps compromising and accepting the fact that not all of the natural environment, if I could use that term, is going to be perfect and pristine, and that it's going to be affected and impacted by human development, and that maybe we should be doing more landfill sites. For all of you greenies out there who are going to be up in arms and sending us emails and et cetera, talking about, how we're going to ruin the country that way. I go back to the size of this country. I mean, we will never run out of room to bury garbage and still have a beautiful country with beautiful national and provincial parks, and clean streams, et cetera, Banff is not going to be ruined, okay? Algonquin Park is not going to be ruined. But, maybe you should be allowing some further exploitation and development in some of these so-called green belts that are constructed around cities that are really putting pressure on the development of cities. And, as a side topic to this sort of peripherally, you don't want everybody says they don't want urban sprawl. I get that, but look, if you don't want urban sprawl and you don't want the development to go out horizontally across the land, the only other direction to go is up. So you have more density, more infrastructure problems as a consequence of that, and guess what? Less and less affordability in terms of housing for the people who live in those regions. So, I know we've segued a little bit. We've gotten off topic. We were laughing at President Duarte for threatening to declare war on Canada over the garbage. But it's from a domestic policy point of view. This raises, I think, important questions, and I just wish that we were willing and able to deal with them.
Yeah, well, the problem with that is you have to get people to think logically when it comes to the environment, and there's been plenty of evidence out there that just doesn't happen, certainly not on a large enough scale. I mean, we've talked about global warming a lot on this particular program, and we've had guests in talking about it, and the one common theme is people do not think rationally when it comes to, the environment. It's either nothing's happening or, oh my God, the sky is falling, one extreme or the other, when neither is true. Anyway, so that's one of the roadblocks that you run into, is getting people to have a calm and rational, how do we fix this problem kind of a conversation without somebody standing up and says, yeah, it sounds great, but not in my backyard. Well, guess what? There's all kinds of room that isn't in anybody's backyard where we could do a landfill if that's what you wanted to do.
But isn't it a terribly hypocritical position to take that we go, not in my backyard, so we're going to ship it off and we're going to put it in somebody else's backyard on the other side of the world. And by the way, virtually anywhere that you dispose of that garbage in the Philippines literally will be in someone's backyard.
Yeah, Philippines does not have a lot of surface area.
well, it's islands, of course, but in the aggregate, we're talking about a much, much, much smaller landmass, a tiny fraction of the size of Canada, with an enormous population compared to Canada's. So, to talk about not in my backyard. Okay, well, in whose backyard then? See, in Canada, there's so much land that you could deposit this stuff forever, okay, and not be in anybody's backyard.
Well, this is what happens, I think, in these cases is when you have somebody stand up and say, not in my backyard, it's not, this is where the irrationality comes in. Because your question is, in whose backyard then, is a very rational one. And their answer is, I don't care, just not mine. And it doesn't, out of sight, out of mind, not my issue. I don't care about it. I just don't want it here. So you find someplace else to put it, and it doesn't matter to me where it is. They don't understand that just punting it over the fence doesn't make the problem go away. You can't just, it's like you're throwing leaves over the fence that you rake up and drop them on your neighbor's lawn. The leaves are still there. All you've done is pissed off your neighbor. Your yard is clean until he comes home, and then he retaliates by raking up his leaves and your leaves and throwing them back onto your lawn. So you can't keep punting this stuff around. So this is why when people get involved in environmental issues, and I'm talking about a lot more than just global warming, it's about environmental issues in general, they lose the ability to think rationally because it's either their way or the highway, or at the very least, I don't want anything to do with it, and don't you ever bring that thing anywhere near me, no matter what it is. And that's why we have so much trouble dealing with this or accepting new technologies, be it incineration or other means of disposing of garbage, or just plain digging a hole, putting in a clay liner, and burying it. They don't want to hear about any of that stuff.
Okay, well, here's the bottom line, Nick, from Nick and Joe in the Combat Zone podcast to President Duarte of the Philippines. Bring it on.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I think we've exhausted the President Duarte stupid politician segment for tonight. It's really okay. There's nothing more I could say about it. We would it would it kind of leaves me speechless that and this guy's democratically elected, by the way. I mean, he's really not a dictator. The Philippines is not a democracy like Canada is, and I know I'm leaving myself open to attack there and criticism, but the truth is it's relatively democratic, and
well, I did call him a quasi. I did call him a quasi dictator.
Yeah, that is true. You did. Anyway, it's really weird, and he's it's okay. I'm almost tongue tied here because I'm thinking of I know the problem. The problem here, Nick, is
what's that?
I'm going to say something really nice about Justin Trudeau.
Again?
He's no President Duarte. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it just goes to show you that things could be a lot worse than the Liberals and Trudeau.
By the way, in the chat room, JBA says, I think we should launch the preemptive strike.
Imagine that.
It would be fun. Put me in the F-18. I'll do it. Do a strafing run first and then a couple of missiles into. Oh, boy, would that be a blast. Literally.
Okay, we're coming. Clearly, we need to cool off here because Nick's turning into a warmonger. So we're going to take a couple of minutes break here, guys. Bottom of the hour, and we'll be back in a few minutes. How does that sound, Nick?
Sounds good to me, buddy. We'll be right back. You guys stick around.
Okay, perfect. Okay, welcome back into the Combat Zone. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and we have a couple of fairly serious topics we want to get into. And Nick.
Yes.
Bombing churches in Sri Lanka.
This is really the tip, it's the tip of the iceberg. It was a huge, the death toll is almost 400 now.
It's that high, right?
Yes, it was 390 or something like that earlier when I looked today.
And it'll probably climb still higher than that.
Yeah, because the seriously wounded, some of them aren't going to make it. And that's what's been happening.
Unfortunately.
They've arrested at least 47 people in the plot. ISIS has said that they are responsible. Now, the thing that's significant about that, whether or not they were actually responsible, when they claim, or any group claims responsibility for a barbaric act like that, even if they weren't the ones to set it off, they're telling you they wish they were. They would like to have been, that this is something they promote and support. So claiming responsibility, even if it's not really them, doesn't really matter. It tells you where their mindset is. And they are in full support of this. The only word I can use is barbaric act. I mean, it's Easter Sunday. It's people are in church. Now, look, we don't normally get into religion too deeply on this show, simply because that's not the tenor or the tone of the show. But both Joseph and I are, we are very orthodox in our religious views. And you're at Easter Sunday Mass celebrating the resurrection of Christ, and it's a peaceful, joyful, happy time, and all of a sudden your whole world is torn apart because some monster walks in with a backpack full of explosives and kills almost 400 people. And not in just one location, but in 3 or 4 churches. I was
just going to mention that. It was a number of churches that were bombed.
Three or four, a number of hotels, and a couple other places. There was like 8 or 9 blasts that went off. Now, the thing about this is, when I say it's the tip of the iceberg, this is not unique. Look at what happened to the Coptic Christians in Egypt. Look at what's going on in Iraq, where they're persecuting Christians there, destroying centuries-old churches. China, same story. And it's not just one sect of Christianity. They're not just against Catholic Christians. They're against Christians no matter who you are. There was a case in Africa, I think it was 2 years ago, where some 9-year-old girls were told to denounce their Christian faith or they would be killed. They refused and were beheaded. Now, they have since been elevated to sainthood for their martyrdom. But killing 9-year-olds, and again, you've got the whole Boko Haram thing. You've got everywhere you look, there's an ongoing in Europe. Everybody's focused on Notre Dame, as they should be, but that's not the only church that's ever been defiled or desecrated or attacked. There was one case where the baptismal font, or the font that holds holy water when you walk into a Catholic church, you can bless yourself with it. It's just a little dish. They put blessed water in. You dip your fingers in it, make the sign of the cross. Well, that got poisoned and made a bunch of people very, very sick. They had to completely sanitize the whole thing. Now, you don't hear about this in the media nearly as often as you should, because I think they're afraid of the last straw to break the camel's back, and they don't want to see. They're trying to avoid a huge upsurge in violence, because when people feel completely helpless and people, there's a natural tendency to want to defend yourself. If the state won't do it and people get desperate enough, they'll take matters into their own hands. And that's never a good thing. It always goes badly when that happens. So this whole attack in Sri Lanka is more fuel on that fire. And ISIS, that's exactly what they want. So it's just barbaric. It's disgusting on beyond words that I have the ability to articulate.
Well, I think you articulated things pretty well, Nick. I'm glad you raised the issue of Europe, because we do hear about these reports of course, in Sri Lanka this past Easter, the Coptic Christians in Egypt. We hear about reports in the Middle East. We hear about reports in Africa. What we don't hear about are the attacks on Christians and Christian institutions, places of worship, etc., in Europe, and in the heart of Western civilization. And I find that deeply troubling because, look, the reality is today, Christianity is the religion that is the most persecuted on the planet. Now, that may come as a surprise to people, and I don't have a dog in the hunt. I'm not Christian, right? So, but I think it's important that people understand that Islam, there is persecution of Muslims. The truth is, most Muslim persecution is perpetrated by fellow Muslims.
Right.
But, okay, I'm willing to accept the fact and admit that, there is there such a thing as Islamophobia? Okay, sure, there's such a thing as Islamophobia. Is it widespread? I don't really think it's widespread, but I do think that hatred of Christians is very widespread, and it's becoming almost endemic in our society. Now, people are not burning down churches in North America, but there are a number of cases of arson in Europe, and it's not just Muslim extremists that are perpetrating these things. And right here in Canada and North America, we see more and more laws and practices that are aimed at Christians and Christian churches and Christian institutions that really attack Christian philosophy, Christian principles, and Christian practices, and a certain Christian moral order. And you would think that in a multicultural society, in a diverse society like Canada, or like Europe, that there would be an element of live and let live, but that's disappearing. So I think that's an important factor to keep in mind. Now, nobody's blowing up churches in Europe. That hasn't, thank God, has not happened yet. And I just want to clarify something. We don't know what the cause of the fire at Notre Dame was yet. So it could very well have been arson. I know they ruled out arson right away. I don't know how they ruled out arson and then said, but we have to find out what the cause was. So I think that was a little disingenuous of them as well. Yeah, it's a growing problem, Nick, and I wish we paid more attention to it.
Well, there was a case in New York City 2 days before the Notre Dame fire.
Correct, right.
Where the St. Patrick's Cathedral in downtown New York City.
Was that before or after
2 days
the
before.
Notre Dame fire?
2 days before.
Okay, because I knew it was around the same time.
Yeah, and where a man was walking into the church with 2 5-gallon gas cans, 2 butane, 2 bottles of barbecue lighter, and 2 butane lighters. Now, unless he was going to have himself one heck of a barbecue, he obviously had some nefarious intent in mind.
Sure, and he had. Now, my recollection here is that when he was confronted by security and church security, which in and of itself speaks volumes.
It does.
Today, you have to have security cards at major churches. Okay, and so this guy comes in and he says, they say he can't come in, and then when he was questioned by police outside, apparently he told them that he had run out of gas and he was just cutting through the church because it was a shortcut back to his car. So when the officers who were questioning him asked him to show them the car, in fact, it turned out that he didn't have a car. So it's pretty clear that this person had some kind of intent to do harm,
right,
at a minimum to the church, if not worshipers who were in the church.
Yeah, and
but you haven't heard anything since then, have you?
No, you haven't.
And again, I find that troubling because I look at, it's always difficult, Nick, to compare and contrast, and one is always hesitant to do this because it's not a competition. But I look at the reaction to the synagogue shooting last October in Pittsburgh. Okay,
right. Yep.
And I'm saying this. I'm Jewish, so I'm not throwing stones or anything. But you could see the angst and the public outcry, and the abject sort of mea culpa almost of people in society in general who were saying how terrible this was. Anti-Semitism, which is on the rise in North America and in Europe, no question about it. But the feeling out there of people wanting to express their sincere sorrow and anger and frustration with what had happened in Pittsburgh to the Jewish community.
Right.
And then you see the same thing with the recent shooting of worshippers in a mosque in New Zealand, where the world, the non-Muslim world, rushes to show solidarity with the Muslim world, okay? That we will not tolerate violence against Muslims. And I'm not criticizing any of that. I think that was an appropriate reaction, okay? Why don't we see the same kind of solidarity with Christians being shown? Yes, there's been a lot of news coverage, etc., but my sense is that people just sort of shrugged it off a little bit. I'm willing to bet that they didn't have too many minutes of silence at the beginning of hockey games during the Stanley Cup playoffs, like they would when, a handful of people were shot in a terrorist attack in Paris around the Charlie Hebdo business and that.
Right.
So there seems to me to be a double standard, and I find that to be very troubling as well. Am I wrong about that?
No, I don't think so. The only point I'd make about the Notre Dame versus Charlie Hebdo is that in Notre Dame, nobody was killed or injured. But the building, certainly suffered heavy damage. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
But you're right about the double standard.
But I'm not talking about Notre Dame here. I'm talking about the bombings in Sri Lanka.
Oh, yeah.
My sense is that the world the rest of the world has not reacted in the same way, with the same level of anger and sense of solidarity, or the desire to express solidarity with the Christian community as there was with the Muslim community in the aftermath to the New Zealand shootings, or with the Jewish community in the aftermath of the attack on Jews at the synagogue in Pittsburgh last October.
There is a rising sentiment of anti-Christian attitudes in the West as it is. Like, you see it on Facebook, you see it on Twitter. People will come out, and if you mention that you're Christian or there's some reason to bring it up, I had one guy said, "I would hunt you down and kill you." I said, "What for?" He said, "Because you're a Christian." Now, that's only one guy. I'm not trying to paint everybody on Facebook or Twitter or other, media platforms like that as that kind, but that kind of anger and vehemence is out there, and I don't understand it, because when you look at the heart of, let's say, Judaism or Christianity, what's there to be mad at? I mean, there's the principles that are built on, I scratch my head at it, but when you see massive attacks like Sri Lanka, yes, they cover it for a while. How long did they cover the mosque shooting in Quebec, as an example?
Right, the mosque shooting in
As
Quebec.
a matter of fact, he was just sentenced.
Yes.
The guy who did it was just sentenced to like 25 years with no chance of parole. That story's been going on for 2 years.
Right, I'd forgotten about that. But
yeah, well, it was in the paper today. Right. But today, Sri Lanka is now on the second page. Next week, they won't even mention it.
Right.
And there's that double standard you're talking about.
That's my point. My point is that when I said earlier about people being surprised that Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world today, people are surprised by that because there's a sense that it's Muslims. And I'm not saying that Muslims are not persecuted or treated badly from time to time, and what happened in New Zealand was a terrible crime, but but it's important to understand that Islam is not under the same kind of relentless attack worldwide that Christians are subjected to. And as I say, that comes as a bit of a surprise to people. As a bit of an aside, I think also I want to mention something that, people, this may come as a surprise to people as well. I've read and heard many stories referring to the gunman, not gunmen, in New Zealand as being a right-wing, white nationalist supremacist or whatever, and being, extreme right-wing, etc. That was actually not his motivation. His motivation was that he attacked the mosque because he felt that this particular religious group, the Muslims, they would get married and they would have many children. And it wasn't that he was against more Muslims in the world. It's that he was against large families for environmental reasons. So this guy in New Zealand who killed all of these Muslims at prayer was actually not a right-winger. He was a left-wing environmentalist fanatic.
Yep.
So, it's not a question of, and so where are the commentators talking about that? I don't think I've heard many people even referring to that particular fact in the mainstream media.
Well, there's you could analyze this to death, but the one thing about the shooter out of New Zealand that we have learned is you're right, he's a radical left-winger. He wanted to start depopulating the Earth because he figured the Earth could only hold about 500 million people indefinitely, which is, that's just is crazy talk. It's the only way I can think of it. So this guy, he's almost unique in the annals of these kinds of shootings. Now, it's not that because you have people who will claim any ideology they want to if they think that it'll further their gains. Like there was Timothy McVeigh as an example. Then you had the guy from Bernie Sanders' campaign who was shooting at Republicans playing softball. Just all kinds of examples from any political stripe or spectrum you want to choose. The problem is that, as I see it, our society has decayed to the point where there's a couple of very interesting problems. Number one, we do not cherish life. There is no sense of sanctity to human life. Far too many people think we're nothing but animals, and animals can be disposed of when they're inconvenient. Now, the other problem is that your ideology is so ingrained, or is so your worldview is so powerful that if anybody threatens it, they become the threat and must be eliminated. And this guy just took it to an extreme.
Yeah, it's really frustrating, and it's a sad commentary on where our society is headed. There was actually a recent article, on a little bit on this topic of this guy who was interested in population control, or that was his motivation at any event in the shooting in New Zealand. I don't have the article, and it wasn't on our list of things to talk about. But on that subject, Nick, there was a feature, I believe it was in the National Post, on people who are on parental strike, or I think
that was in the news this week.
Right, was in the news this week, and the idea being that they feel that the Earth is overpopulated, and that as a consequence, they've decided that they're not going to have any children. And these are Canadians, but we see this kind of thing around in different places around the world as well. But can you imagine any Canadian complaining about overpopulation?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it boggles the mind. I mean, you have to live, and even in Toronto, I mean, it's maybe if you're taking the subway every day and you're worried about the crowds at the Bloor and Yonge subway station. So during rush hour, or the Yonge Street line during rush hour period, up and down Yonge Street can get pretty crowded. But you have to spend your entire life in the core of a city, in the most populated area, and never get outside of that area, let alone outside of the city, for you to believe that a country like Canada is overpopulated.
Well,
or even the United States. And look, even Europe, where there's the population density of the countries is much greater than it is in North America. I mean, to suggest that a country like England or France or Germany or Italy, that these countries are overpopulated, or Austria, I mean, it's a fantasy. And these people are living in a fantasy world, Nick.
I saw a study online a couple of years ago that's dealt with this overpopulation myth. And it said that its conclusion was that you could build two-bedroom homes with 4 people in each home for every person on Earth. And the subdivision required for it would be no larger than the state of Texas. That's every human being on the planet.
Right.
Now, Allison and I are actually watching a show called Below Zero, and it's about life in Alaska. Now, I don't want to live up there. They get, cold. They have 4 months of summer and 8 months of winter. So, and these people live in very remote areas. One guy lives 200 miles from the nearest town, hundreds of miles from the nearest, 100 miles or more from the nearest human being. He's out there by himself. And if you ever doubt that, for those of you listening, if you ever doubt that what Joseph just told you is true, I want you to do this. Go to Google Earth. Take whatever city you're nearest. Let's say you're in Calgary, or maybe here in Ottawa. Zoom in on the city and then go straight north. If you do that from Ottawa, once you're over the Ottawa River and past... I'm trying to think of some of the communities. Once you get about 20 or 30 miles into Quebec, you run out of road real fast, and any further, and there's no roads at all. Nothing but trees all the way to the other end of Quebec. That's just in the province of Quebec. Do it in BC. Do it in Alberta. Do it in Saskatchewan. Do it in Manitoba. Even Prince Edward Island, with 150,000 people on it, is not overcrowded. We have some mighty dense areas, as you point out. Like if you never get beyond Yonge and Bloor, then, yeah, you'd think the world is overpopulated. But if you drive for an hour or two north of Toronto, or in any direction from Toronto, you'll find out there's plenty of room. This whole thing is nothing but an ongoing myth that people use to justify some pretty radical and dangerous policies. And I, for one, I live on 67 acres. I live on a dead-end road. I'm only 2 hours from the nation's capital. I'm 4 hours from Ottawa. I live, if anybody from those cities would think I live in the middle of nowhere. And I kind of like that. I like having the room to stretch out. There's just this nonsense about, how are we ever going to feed anybody? Well... Good Lord. If that's your only concern, then don't worry, because we have enough ground and enough technology to feed everybody on this planet over and over again. The problem isn't growing it, it's the distribution of the food in countries where you have despots and dictators controlling food and using it as a tool to keep their people subjugated. That's the problem. Solve that, and you'll go a long way to solving world hunger. How we got here, I have no idea.
Right, and environmentalists who refuse to allow the land to be cultivated.
Oh yes, that's another one. Yes, that's
or who refuse to allow pesticides to prevent food from crops from being destroyed by insects or other kind of diseases.
Yes, everything's a conspiracy. Every company out there is rotten to the core. Unless it's their company.
Right, which leads me to an important declaration, okay? Everybody out there, get your children vaccinated, please and thank you. Okay, you're not going to cause your child to have whatever. What's the
what
you're thinking about?
You're talking about the anti-vaxxers?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
autism.
Autism, yeah.
Yeah, no, your children are not going to have autism because you got them vaccinated. So,
Well,
anyway, but I digress. I don't know how we got on this topic. It's just crazy, Nick. The world is going insane.
Yes,
and you and I
is.
are like the only two sane people here. I don't know what it is. It kind of reminds me of the old island of sanity that that our friend
Sometimes I wondered about
Bull Green used to have, right? Right?
Yeah. Well, that's
massage your temples.
Yeah.
Take some Prozac.
beat your head against that brick wall.
Okay. Now we're getting a little silly on a serious topic. We should not be doing that. Nick, we are coming up to the top of the hour, so
That means
I think that we should take a break. What do you think of that?
I think that's a great idea. We have a whole list of other topics to get to yet, and it's probably time to change gears anyway.
Okay, so we will be back in a few minutes. Don't go away.
Folks, I'm in the middle of licking my fingers from my wife's delicious chocolate zucchini cupcake. Oh, man, they're good. Welcome back to the Combat Zone. He's Joe. I'm Nick. And we have a whole host of other things to talk about. We just spent the first hour talking about Sri Lanka and things like that. And there is another one. Which one do we want to do next?
Well, we were talking about the story survey that was conducted this week. Well, it was actually conducted last week, I assume, but the report came out this week that a certain percentage, most Canadians, I guess it was most Canadians, report 50%. That they're about $200 away from insolvency,
which is a fancy word for bankruptcy.
From bankruptcy, so that really struck me, Nick. As being both serious and absurd at the same time. Serious because obviously, people are overextended. They're high, and their debt is high. They're not making enough money to cover their bills.
Right.
And that's creating, I would expect, a certain amount of anxiety, of sleeplessness, of tension, high blood pressure, the whole works. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible way to live. Money problems. I read once somewhere that money problems are the number one reason why couples break up.
Yes,
it's the number one reason for divorce. Now, whether it's the actual problems or it's the arguments or the fighting that might go on around this, I don't know, but that's the number one reason I understand for precipitating divorce.
The number two reason is whether the toilet seat's up or down, but yeah, you're right about number one.
So it's okay. So it's a serious issue.
Mm-hmm.
But I also felt that it was a little bit absurd because while there are people who live at the lower end of the economic scale, and that's just natural,
right?
Most people don't. So one has to wonder why it is that people are at $200 away from insolvency. And the only reason that I could come up with, and I'm sorry for those of you out there who are listening that perhaps find yourself in this situation or close to this situation, but the only reason that I could think of, frankly, is that people are just spending far too much money in relation to what they're earning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the I'm spending too much on my rent. It's the I have to live in a 5-bedroom house as opposed to a 3-bedroom house because each of my children have to have their own bedroom. And I'm not saying that there's a problem with that. We live in a wonderful country and a relatively affluent country. And certainly, you know, people are entitled to a higher standard of living. I get that, and I'm not criticizing anyone for it. If you want to have 3 cars, have 3 cars. If you want to have the latest iPhones, or you want to go off to, you know, the casino once a month, or you want to go to the movies, or you want to have, you know, your cable vision, your internet,
Netflix
your
and
computers, your cell phones, your go to the your Netflix, Amazon Video, Crave TV, etc., etc., etc. I sound a little bit like Yul Brynner in The King and I, right? Etc., etc., etc. All of those things are great things to have, and I do not criticize anyone for wanting them or for having them. But, you know, it seems to me that you have to prioritize. And it seems to me that, you know, you want to be building a little bit of a nest egg for your retirement, perhaps even leave a little bit for your children later on after you've passed on, if you've had children, and you're not one of these I'm on child strike kind of
Well, I am now.
people. So it just seems to me that if you're $200 away from insolvency, most of you who are in that situation are in that situation because you continue to make poor financial decisions.
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. For one thing, people in Canada have been taught that don't worry about retirement. The government will be there for you. And we will take care of your retirement. That's what CPP is all about. And they never really think through that. I mean, they hear it all the time that there won't be enough money, for people who are 35 and under to get CPP at all. And for those of us who are older, we're going to have to work longer and longer before we qualify. Okay, well, the first thing through their mind is, that'll never happen to me. That'll happen to my neighbor, but it'll never happen to me. You know, that's a age-old way of dealing with things you don't like. On the other side of the coin, you have people who have never been taught how to manage money. They used to teach it in school, how to balance a checkbook, how to write a check. Okay, now, to be fair, some of that stuff is going by the wayside simply because of technology. You don't really need to write checks anymore. You can do it all electronically, e-transfers and so on. And that's going to be the way money's moved around in the not-too-distant future. You may have some cash on you for small purchases and things like that, but you're not going to pay for something. You know, you're not going to pull $1,500 out of your pocket to buy a new trailer for your ATV. Okay, that's not going to happen. You'll e-transfer the money and that's it. So, but at the same time, because they have never been taught to budget, they never stop to think about, if I spend $50 buying pizza for the family tonight because my wife has cooked all week, okay, be a nice treat. Can I afford it? They never stop and say, what does that do to the budget? Look, Allison and I, when we first got married, because of the way things worked in our relationship, I was a sailor. And my first year in the Navy, I was gone for 7 months because sailors have this bad habit of going with their ships to sea. And they stay there for quite a while because that's where a ship's place is. So somebody's got to run the books, and that job fell to her because I wasn't around. So over time, she's been the one to write the checks and all that stuff. So I have to be very careful in my spending, even today. If I want to go and buy a new ball cap, or if I want to go and buy a jacket, or if I want to go and buy, go out for breakfast, I have to think, okay, what's the budget look like? Because we talk about that all the time, and she'll say, this week it's not too bad. If you want to, you want to go out for a breakfast or two, then go ahead. Or this week, you better be careful. I have to respect that. But most people never think that way. At least the ones who find themselves in trouble. That doesn't mean to say that we're, that my wife and I are wealthy people. Oh, good Lord, it's such a long way from that. It's not even funny. But because we've gone through some very difficult times and had to learn these kinds of things, that we're able to teach our kids about those things. And they've become very effective money managers for the most part. Some of them are too young to know yet. But they used to teach it in school, and they don't anymore. And that's why there's such economic illiteracy out there that people think that, if you have a check in your checkbook or you've got room on your credit card, you've got money.
Well, you're raising an interesting subject right there. I was going to bring it up myself, Nick, and that is credit cards. Is it possible that credit is too easy to obtain today?
Absolutely.
Because people. It used to be that people saved and then bought. Mm-hmm. Except for really big ticket items like your house or your car or whatever. Right. You take out a loan for these things. Okay, you take out a mortgage for buying property. But for things like clothes, jewelry, tools for your shed or whatever. It just or even furniture, for pity's sake. It used to be that people would save and then they would buy. And so once you bought in cash, you owned and you didn't owe any money on it. But it just seems that today people treat their credit cards not like you would treat cash, where you make a purchase. See, what we do is we have a credit card. We buy whatever we want with the credit card, but we have to pay that credit card at the end of every month. We pay it off religiously. So, there's a certain amount of discipline. So it's, look, frankly, today you need a credit card because there are so many things where you can't. You got
to rent a car. You want to rent a hotel room.
But in reality, you should treat your credit card as if it was cash in your pocket. And if you're not going to have that money to pay the credit card at the end of the month, then you can't afford it, rather than putting it on credit and paying it off over time. So I think that this is part of the insolvency or close to insolvency problem, is that people are spending like crazy, but they're not spending their money. They're borrowing the money, and then they have to pay it back. So, I buy a house, and then I have to have the latest furniture. And then, of course, I've got to have a hot tub. Then I've got to have my 2 cars. And then I have to have all of the entertainment around me.
And
so, I want to live the middle-class dream, which, again, I don't object to. I think that's a wonderful thing. But, you have to do it responsibly. And my sense is that people are not doing it responsibly.
Let me give you a personal example of a relative of mine. We'll call her, it doesn't matter. The young lady came to me and she said, would it make more sense to drive to the East Coast in a mid-sized car to make it more comfortable for the people who go with me, or would it be better to get a smaller car and save on fuel? I said, well, why would you be going to the East Coast anyway? I knew a little bit of her background. And she said, well, there's a wedding out there I want to attend. I said, so how much money have you got? And she told me. I said, for the sake of this discussion, let's say it was $2,000. And I said, okay, no, you don't have $2,000, because what you have are bills. You have rent, you have utilities, you have other things, and they all have to be looked after before you have any money. Like, you should have 2 or 3 months worth of bills in the bank before you even consider making a road trip like that. Never mind the fact she didn't have a license and had to get one of her sisters to drive. Excuse me.
Maybe I should step in here, Nick. You're having a coughing fit there.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. Anyway, okay, so that aside, the point I was trying to make to her was, just because you have some cash in hand doesn't mean you have any money. You have responsibilities you have to meet first. Then if there's anything left over, then you might think about it. But until that time, you don't have any money. You have responsibilities, and those have to come first. If you want to, send a card and a gift or something, but you cannot afford a trip to the East Coast and spend $2,000 that are required to pay your bills. Now, she didn't like my answer. I'll tell you that right now. She was not a happy camper. But what else was I supposed to do? Say, oh, by the way, go and never mind the medium. Go get a large car and blow it all. It would have cost her that much in gas. So anyway, the point is that it never occurred to her, and just that you got to think ahead. You cannot just go spending money just because you have it in your hand. You have to make sure things are taken care of prioritize your spending, and if there's anything left, then you can either save it or spend it. That's up to you. But take care of those responsibilities first, and that is a lesson far too many people who are a lot older than she was still haven't learned.
Right. The other thing that bothers me, I think the credit cards charge terribly high interest rates, unjustifiably high interest rates. And I've heard people say from time to time that we should pass laws to regulate what credit cards can charge in interest rates. I'm opposed to those types of laws.
So am I.
But that doesn't mean that I think the credit card companies are not, taking full advantage of the of people when they charge the kind of interest rates, 20, 24%, 25% per annum. So that's a problem. But again, if you're going to carry a balance on your credit card, then right away there's a problem. The problem is you're not managing your finances properly. So nobody should ever have to pay interest on a credit card except for in exceptional circumstances. Okay, but that should be exceptional. It should be rare. But today what happens is people, they max out their credit cards and then they make minimum monthly payments.
That's right.
And so, of course, if that's the way you're going to handle your finances, then of course you're going to be only $200 away from insolvency. I have news for you, Nick. If that's the way you're living, if that's the way you're handling your finances, I'm surprised that you're only $200 away from insolvency. I think you're insolvent already.
Well,
what happens if you lose your job? What happens if you can't work because you're ill or you injure yourself, and so you're off work for a period of time? Does society through the government have a responsibility for looking after you and paying for your bills?
Some would say yes.
At that point in time, does your employer? It's crazy. Things. How did we get to this point in time where people just, they live as if they have no responsibilities whatsoever?
I think we got here through misplaced compassion, because nobody likes to see another person suffer. First of all, let me bring AJ into the conversation. He has this to say: credit cards bring an interesting perspective. Everyone says that physical money will vanish in the next 20 years, and I think that's horrible. The lack of discretion that occurs with plastic purchases, as opposed to handing over a bunch of bills and the appreciate on of a dollar. Okay, and the appreciation of a dollar that comes with the physical cash is a big problem. Seeing that being expedited doesn't leave me with a feeling of comfort. So he's saying that, having to take out of your pocket the cash and the bills and lay it down on the counter for your purchase rather than using plastic makes you think about the money that you're spending, where if you just plunk down your credit card, there's no physical transfer that takes place. They just punch it into a machine and he says, yep, approved, and away you go. I get his point, and it's a valid one. But I think that the misplaced compassion, because nobody wants to see anybody else suffer, all these things are programs to help people avoid, like we have. I'm not suggesting we go back to debtor's prison or things like that, but we have the ability for people to go through bankruptcy and wipe out their debts. And there's a place for that, and there's a time for that. But I tend to think that people look at that as too much of a parachute, where, oh, well, if I can't manage it, I'll just wipe the record clean with a new bill of health and go out and get a credit card and rebuild my credit, and we'll be all good to go. And they live in that cycle. And it's not healthy because nobody's ever had a Simon in their life. If you remember America's Got Talent, the judge Simon, he'd be one of the few to stand up and say, lady or sir, you can't sing. And I would like to get my hands on the person who told you could sing because they did you a huge injustice. And he would shoot them down in flames because they couldn't sing. Now, who would you rather have? Somebody telling you the truth, even if you don't like it, or somebody who's patting you back, telling you everything's okay when it isn't? And I think too many times people take the latter route because they don't want to offend anybody. So we build these social programs and we build in Canada Pension Plan and we make credit easier. Credit card companies do it because that's how they make money at 21% interest and sometimes higher. Okay, and these cash loan, payday cash, or was it payday loans, places can charge you up to 49%. It's absurd, obscene, but you don't have to go in there. Anyway, they just, that's how we got here, is people either take advantage of misplaced compassion or are willing to feed the addict with the drug of his choice. In this case, it's money. So credit card companies and people like Visa, MasterCard, Discovery, and all these other ones are only too happy to crank your limit up because they know there's a very good chance you're going to run it to the max and pay 21% interest on it.
Yeah, I don't think the money is the addiction itself. I think it's the spending.
Oh, well, okay, fair enough. But you have to have one to be able to do the other.
And of course, there's also the keeping up with the Joneses thing, particularly with younger people who, again, they need to have, every year they need to have a brand new cell phone. So you get into, it's like being on the credit card treadmill, only
right.
You're on the cell phone treadmill.
Well, how many stories have we heard of people who go out and they'll have a handful of credit cards and they use one to pay off the other? Well, that's a loser's game. That's a downward spiral because sooner or later that house of cards comes crashing down, and now what?
No pun intended.
Yeah, no kidding. But for those of you listening, don't think I'm any economic genius. If you had one look at my bank account, you'd figure out that is not true. But life brings with it some experience, and after making tons of mistakes myself, if you don't learn from them, then you're going to keep repeating them. And what I have learned is money is usually in the individual's lives finite. You can only work so many hours. You can only get so many pay raises. There is a cap on how much money you will earn over your lifetime, unless there are a few provisos and caveats that you're a business owner and the business takes off and you're in a very lucrative market, or you win the lottery. But even those, because when you're earning money, you're trading money for time or physical movements. And if you're in an hourly wage job, there is a limit to how much you can earn. So shepherd what you earn carefully, because if it vanishes on you and you run out a month before you run out of money, you're going to find yourself in a very difficult situation.
There's a story I like to tell. I think I've mentioned it to you before, Nick, about John Paul Getty, who was the oil tycoon.
Yep.
And he was once being interviewed by somebody who asked him, and by the way, I don't know if this is really true, but this is the story, okay?
Yeah, it's a great legend.
That this person asked him how he made his fortune. So he said, well, I'll tell you a story. I was walking through this factory one day where I used to buy my barrels that would be filled with oil and then shipped. The shipping was done this way. And I noticed the way that they were doing the assembly of the barrels, and I came up with a way that they could do it cheaper. And so what was the moral of the story? The moral of the story was that, or is, as he said, I didn't make my fortune, I saved it.
Yeah, that's a very good one.
And again, the whole thing here is you have to, if you're making X dollars, you have to spend fewer than you're making.
Doesn't matter how much you make. It's how
whatever it is.
Yep.
You have to spend fewer dollars than you're making.
You could be a multimillionaire and still go bankrupt because if you're spending more than you're taking in,
absolutely,
you're on a sinking ship.
That's absolutely the case.
Yep.
So if you're spending more money or the same amount of money as you're taking in, which I suspect is really where this $200 away from insolvency comes from, it's really people who are just on this treadmill. They're treading water. They're treading water. They're making X dollars and they're spending X dollars on a regular basis. So they never really get ahead. What you have to do is you have to accept that you're going to have a lower standard of living in order to be able to put money away. And, that's a good feeling. Money in the bank is not a bad feeling.
No.
And knowing that you're building some kind of savings so that at some point in time you're going to be able to look after yourself and live relatively comfortably in retirement. And if you earn more money, then you increase your spending. But the key is to find that healthy gap between income and outflow.
And just let me back up what you, because
I'm starting to sound like a financial advisor, and I really,
Yeah, well, it's easy to advise people on how to spend their money. It's a much harder trick to do it when you're spending your own.
Tell me about it.
As a friend of mine who's an accountant for years would say, easy to buy, hard to pay for. And boy, there's a lot of truth in that short sentence. But there's another story I like to relate about people and wealth. During the Klondike Gold Rush, very few of the prospectors who went up into Alaska and the Yukon actually came back with anything at all. There were a few who did, no doubt, but the people who really got rich weren't the people who were using the gold pans. They were the ones that were selling them. The pickaxes and the supplies they needed to get over Rogers Pass. Those guys made a lot of money.
Okay, Nick, well, we're coming up to the bottom of the hour, so I think we're going to go for another short break. So stay put, guys, and we'll catch you back here in a couple of minutes in the combat zone. Okay, I'm Joe. He's Nick. Welcome back into the combat zone. And Nick, was that relaxing music or what?
You know what? This is just perfect. We're just laid back and mellow, and that music just seems to hit the right spot.
I don't know. I'm thinking that would have been some appropriate music to play during our pot show. I don't remember what episode that was. But if you go back around the time that they legalized marijuana,
35 or something like that.
Something like that. Just check it out. And I want to tell you how
the sky with diamond. No, that's LSD.
No, we never played that side. That's a Beatles.
Yeah, and it's also about LSD, not pot.
Now, are you one of these people that thinks that the Beatles was the greatest band ever?
Nope, not even close.
No, I don't particularly. I mean, look, I'm not going to take away anything from their talent. They were a talented bunch. They made some pretty good music, I guess. But the best band ever? Oh, man, give me a break.
No.
The Monkees were better than the Beatles, for Pete's sake.
The Beatles, like Elvis, were the right phenomenon in the right place at the right time. And I don't take anything away from them, but their voices, from a musical point of view, are nothing spectacular. Their musical talent at their instruments were average for the time based on other bands. The range and quality of their music. You hear a Beatles song, and it's a Beatles song. And they became popular because they were different, not because they were good or better than what was out there. In my humble opinion, I think one of the greatest bands ever take the stage was Freddie Mercury's Queen. They had an unbelievable variety in their music. They had the best lead singer in rock and roll history. Each of the guys was a master at his own instrument. They all wrote, they all sang. There was so much about Queen that was just unbelievable. If you remember the Live Aid concert Freddie Mercury put on, I keep calling it Freddie Mercury, that Queen put on, it just blew the doors off the place. And they did Marumba Stadium in Brazil in front of 150,000 people, the largest concert of that had ever been held up to that time. There have been bigger ones since, but at the time, that was it. They've sold 500 million albums. They're one of the few bands ever to come out with the same song 3 different times and have it hit number 1 each time. I mean, there's no comparison between the Beatles and Queen. Now, the Beatles are, they're an icon. I get that. Everybody knows who the Beatles are. But if you want to compare them musically, they don't hold a candle to Queen. Not even close.
What about, let's see. I was a ZZ Top fan. I still am.
I like some of their stuff.
Although, they're a little, I have to say, a little one-dimensional.
Yeah.
And I hate to confess this on air, but I'm kind of a Ted Nugent fan. Although
I like his politics better than his music.
Ted Nugent is a little one-dimensional as well.
Yep.
He sort of perfected the standing in front of the speakers and getting the feedback, turning that into a bit of an art form. But he's got there's some pretty good music he's got. And I thought his music, or I think his music, is a little more versatile and eclectic than ZZ Top. But there are a few groups out there that I like, and I like some rock music. I like classical music. I love blues music, but sort of the rock blues, which is a little bit sort of like ZZ Top. But when I talk about blues, I like
more Southern rock. Are you talking more Southern rock?
Southern rock, I like. Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Because that's where I would have put ZZ Top.
Yeah, ZZ Top sort of fits into that category. Alabama.
Oh yeah, I always did like Alabama.
Right. So they're okay as well. Anyway, and if you go on the internet, you'll find some of these Southern groups. Groups that you've never even heard of.
Well, look at Kansas. I mean, right. They were a phenom in and of themselves. Steve Miller was another one. There's a band I like, although there's a saying about them. The band is Boston. And once you've heard one Boston song, you've heard them all.
Right. They're kind of one of those, again, one-dimensional.
Absolutely.
Good music, for sure.
Yeah.
But
you only need to listen to one or two songs, and you've heard their whole repertoire. But when it comes to music, I like to think I have a rather wide taste. I don't like a lot of modern music. I can't stand modern pop. I just hip-hop and rap, I just never got my head around. Because to me, what matters is the story being told, and can the lead singer sing. And as long as they can sing, then I'll listen to them, which is why I don't like the Rolling Stones. I can't stand the Stones. Mick Jagger couldn't sing his way out of a wet paper bag with both ends shot out. I mean,
And he's older than 70 years old, just had heart surgery.
Yeah, he's got grandkids.
Then, of course, there's the king of all of this stuff, and that is Ozzy Osbourne.
Oh, my God. He's
Black
a brilliant
Sabbath.
businessman, but, oh, man. AC/DC, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin. Yeah, I was more into bands like Styx and Queen and Supertramp and a little bit of Asia and stuff like that. Good, strong vocals. That's what I liked. I don't know how we got onto this.
We're just free associating, Nick.
Okay.
Free associating.
All right.
Okay. All right. Flooding.
Yes.
Take it away, Nick.
All right. I think that what we're seeing when it comes to this flooding, first of all, it's nothing unusual. For as long as I can remember, there have been floods in the springtime. when I was a young lad growing up on the farm down in Staples, down near Leamington, I remember several years. And now you got to remember something about Essex County, which is where Staples is, right down there near the about 30 miles north of Point Pelee. The ground is as flat as a table. They measure the fall of the land in parts of inches per mile. Okay, so the land's basically flat. It's an old lake bottom. And there was a flood. I remember this very clearly. We had a ditch that ran all the way down about a mile and went around the curve that turned towards Leamington. And the farther you went, the deeper it got because it was a drainage ditch and all the water had to run towards Lake Erie. And that ditch at the curve, which is about a mile from my house, was full to the road. And all the land from there all the way back over our farm to another quarter mile the other way was under, not including the ditches, but if you went for a walk out in the field, you were in 2.5 feet of water. There was water for as far as the eye could see. Nobody blamed it on anything except the fact we got a lot of rain. And that's just one example. 2 years ago, my wife and I, we went on a business trip up to Sudbury. This is in January or February. Why I went to Sudbury in January or February, I don't know. I don't know what it is about me going up north. I always do it in the wintertime. Bad idea. Anyway, we're driving along, and we're up getting close to Sudbury, and I've been noticing the lakes along the way are almost empty. Like the ice is broken and flat, laying on the bottom of the lake. And it never dawned on me till later. And I'm watching this thinking, this is really bizarre. So we did our thing in Sudbury and drove home. And as we got down towards, back towards Pembroke and, down towards, back into our neck of the woods, the lakes are all full to the brim. Okay, so that's in January or February. Along comes April. And there's flooding all over the place. In Renfrew County and in Ottawa, in the eastern end, all over the place, in the lower Ottawa watershed. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me why we didn't hear anything about Sudbury and its surrounding areas. Because the water management team that looks after water levels in that watershed up there had looked ahead and say, okay, there's a heavy snowpack down. We have no room for that water with the lakes at their current levels. And if we get any amount of rain in the spring, we're really in trouble. So they drained the lakes down. They drew them down during the cold, quiet months. And in the meantime, we didn't. Down here in Renfrew County and in the Ottawa area, nobody thought about lowering the levels of the lake down to a reasonable level to make room for this onrush of water with the heavy snowpack, the thick ice, and the rain. If they had done that, if they'd taken, pick your lake, okay, White's Lake, come on, Golden Lake, Round Lake, all these different lakes in the watershed, if they'd run them down so that they had room in them to absorb this flood, we might have had some flooding, but nothing like we saw. Nothing like that. Like, even as you and I talk now, on the other side of Deep River, the flooding is so bad they had to close Highway 17. There's a culvert that's under 30 feet of water and has eroded the road, so all that's left is the tarmac cap. It looks fine, but there's no soil underneath it. It's all been washed away. And they have to wait for the water to go down before they can get at it to repair it. I think there's a problem with water management in the lower Ottawa River watershed. And that's where this flooding is coming from. It's got nothing to do with global warming. It's got everything to do with incompetence. At least that's my opinion.
Well, one thing that we can all agree on, and that is that global warming and climate change have nothing whatsoever to do with spring flooding. I mean, if it did, the only possible way that it might, that you could even make that argument plausibly, would be if you had an inordinate amount of snow and rain and precipitation, both in the wintertime, accumulated snow, and then, heavy rain in the springtime. But that hasn't occurred. And so how do you make the argument, as is being made with politicians right now, that they look at flooding and they go, oh, climate change. It's all due to climate change. And I'm thinking to myself, how could it possibly be due to climate change when we didn't have as much snow this year as we had last year, and the rain hasn't been particularly bad this spring? So there has to be other causes, as you point out. Now, I heard an interesting theory today from a friend of mine who also was pointing out that, when you have higher water levels downstream from built-up urban areas, to a degree, you could consider that that's possibly that a possible contributing factor is the fact, especially as when the frost is gone, as you were pointing out a few minutes when we were speaking offline, Nick. When the land should be able to absorb the water, but there is no more land to absorb the water, we collect it and then we drain it into the river through our sewage system.
Right.
Or our stormwater system.
Yeah,
which, of course, in Ottawa, the nation's capital, through various, unfortunate circumstances, turns out to be our sewage system.
Yes. No,
but that's a different subject altogether.
It is, and we'll leave that one for another day. So you're quite right that especially I'm not sure. I know on my farm, the frost is pretty much out of the ground. Like when I try to move hay now with the tractor, I'm leaving trenches because you got 800 pounds of hay and a 6,000-pound tractor, and the ground is very soft, so it gets real squishy really fast. But up until recently, that wasn't the case. If the ground is frozen, it has no ability to absorb water, and the water runs right off it, which is what leads to a lot of springtime flooding. So now in the cities, if you put tarmac over the ground and streets and that kind of stuff, of course, you reduce the ability of what ground there is to absorb. And even in that case, the ground can only absorb so much. It gets saturated.
True. And
then there's no place, then it's going to run off anyway. So you have to look at the control of the water levels, taking all of those things into account. And I'm not sure that's being done, certainly not in a competent way. And that leads to, I won't blame it all on that, but I'll blame 80% of it on that.
Well, it's a contributing factor, as I say.
Yes, absolutely.
But again, the most important takeaway here is that, you can, even though we have argued against on this show vociferously the idea of man-made climate change, and we've had guests that have explained why the theory of man-made climate change and man-made global warming is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I could very easily see how people who are uninformed could look at the evidence superficially and reach the conclusion, wrongly perhaps, but reach the conclusion that man-made climate change is plausible. Not that it's a proven theory, but that it's plausible. But you cannot look at spring flooding and look at the evidence that's out there and reach the conclusion that climate change, man-made or otherwise, is the culprit.
Well,
the evidence simply, you have to look year to year. And if you had 30% less snow in this season and a similar amount of spring rain than you have normally, and the flooding is worse than it has been in recent years, the cause cannot be climate change. Because the climate has not acted differently. If the climate has been different in this winter, it's been less severe than in previous winters. I'm not saying that's the case with us this winter, but I'm just saying that certainly it's not the most severe winter that we've ever had.
No, it isn't. But we have had a tremendous amount of snow. Like when I was out, this has got to be a month ago, we had pretty much exhausted our supply of wood because the cold season, the heating season, was abnormally long. And the wood I had set aside, I had about 12 cords, I guess, set aside between the propane furnace and the wood stove, was going to get us through the winter. Well, we ran out of wood before we ran out of winter, so I had to go and cut down some more. Trying to walk around in that snow, it was above my knee. And
sorry, you're talking about this winter, Nick?
Yes.
Right.
So
well, we had more snow than
we had a
average,
lot of snow,
especially.
So the point I'm making, though, is that this is not abnormal. This is a traditional Canadian winter,
right? For sure.
And it's not climate change, because if the climate change sky is falling crowd were right, you would see less snow. You would see milder weather. Because the planet is supposed to be warming up twice as fast in Canada as anywhere else. We have had some fun with that argument before.
That's true.
So if that's true, then where the heck did all the snow come from? You know, where did the ice on many of the lakes is 3 and 4 and 5 feet thick? Well, where did all that come from? I mean, you could have drove a bulldozer across my pond this year. Not that I would recommend it, but it was plenty thick. I just don't understand how people can look at the reality of the physical world around them and say, yep, doesn't matter. I believe we're getting warmer, when in fact we're getting cooler.
Well, it's not so much that they think that we're getting warmer from personal experience. Although if you've had it drummed into your head, day in and day out that the earth is getting warmer, then I suppose every hot spell that you experience, you subconsciously, at a minimum, attribute that hot spell to global warming. But of course, you turn on the news, and this is all that you're seeing on the news, is that, they set a record temperature in Pakistan. They set a record temperature in India. They set a record temperature, in Wawa land, wherever that is. Okay? And so, you're being bombarded with these catastrophic or stories of climate catastrophe. So it's and that the world is warming, the world is warming, the world is warming. And then, of course, 3 weeks ago, we turn on our television or open up the newspaper and we read a leaked report. There's my, air quotation, Mike, leaked report claiming that that Canada, as you say, is warming at twice the rate speed as the rest of the world, 3 times the speed in the Arctic.
And on top of that,
of course, I don't know what happens if you get to the North Pole. Okay, so if you're standing like 1 foot south of the North Pole on the Canadian side,
that's right,
then you're warming up at 3 times the rate of everywhere
Take 2
else.
steps forward,
where you might shift 3 feet around to the left or to the right, and you're in a totally different country, so that doesn't count.
Yeah, it's nonsense,
anymore.
No doubt.
It's the absurdity of it is manifest. It should be easy for people to pick it up, but they aren't. They just get bombarded. And, here's the thing, Nick, okay? God bless people. They don't know. They don't care. They only know what they're told. People are not, they're busy with their lives, right? They've got, Nick, most Canadians are $200 away from insolvency. Do you think they have the time or the patience to think through the arguments around global warming?
Well, to tell you the truth, most Canadians don't see it as an issue. Poll after poll shows that it's down there below national defense in their list of concerns. It's only the elite media and the liberal politicians who go around beating the fear-mongering drum. Oh, and Councillor Sean Menard from the city of Ottawa that said this is a climate emergency. And we've been having a little bit of a spat. I actually called him Climate Barbie, and he got all offended at that. But, oh well, if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen.
Well, no, he's clearly he's not Climate Barbie. He's Climate Ken.
Oh, okay. What a match pair they'd make. Anyway, but people, they just can't. It's like they can't do 2 things at once. They can't think while they're changing oil in the car or mowing the lawn or, driving to work. They never stop and say, well, does this really make sense? They listen to the CBC, and the CBC keeps beating it into their head, man. Climate emergency. We're all going to fry. We got 11 or 3.5 years left, depending on what you read. There's a new story out today that says we only have 3.5 years left now to save the planet.
Oh, well.
Good Lord. And you know what's going to be funny? 4 years from now, we'll still be here, and 12 years from now, we'll still be here.
Yeah, and I can't not help but make the observation that the people who are really, really, really suffering intellectually, emotionally, psychologically as a consequence of all of these stories out there are our children who hear that the world is going to end in 3 or 4 years, or we're not going to, they have no future. Really, I mean, it is inadvertent, maybe, but it's still child abuse.
You know what? There's going to be a whole bunch of really pissed off kids if the world doesn't end 13 years from now.
Or relieved.
Relieved, yes, but pissed off at the scientific community and the people who told them, be afraid, be very afraid, because the sky is falling and you're all going to die. And they get them all wound up, and then only to find out they've been lied to on a massive scale. There's going to be some who will reject that and say, oh, well, they just got the timing wrong. It's like talking
Or they're going to be celebrating because Justin Trudeau saved the planet.
Day. Yeah, well.
Clearly, everything that we did as a consequence of the Paris Climate Change Accord saved the planet.
Right. Well, let's hope that Justin Trudeau saves the planet from the seat of a canoe, not from the PMO's chair. He can go and paddle around whatever lake he wants to. I couldn't care less. But having him in office longer than next October is too much.
Well, we're going to see what happens. Traditionally, when the provinces vote Conservative, the federal government is Liberal.
You know what?
That's the pattern.
We're going to buck that trend this time.
Well, it could very well be, Nick. The future, I'm not going to predict the future. So you could very well be right. I'm just telling you what the trend historically has been. When the provinces are conservative, the federal government is liberal.
Well, maybe traditionally, but not this time. I think Mr. Trudeau has done far too much damage to his own brand, and it's going to be there are going to be a lot of broken-nosed liberals on the day after the election because they've had the door slammed in their face.
We shall see.
We certainly shall.
Okay, Nick, we're coming up to the top of the hour, and that means we have exhausted these topics once again.
We didn't get to the gay loony. Okay.
No, we've done the gay loony before.
I'm taking them back to the bank. I'm not going to carry them.
Okay, got that, guys? Nick is starting a campaign. When the gay loony comes out, he is refusing to accept it, although it's still going to be legal tender.
I'll just take it back to the bank and exchange it for an older one.
We'll just have to see what happens then about that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a blast. Send us your comments at thecombatzone.ca, all one word, comments at thecombatzone.ca. Don't forget to patronize our sponsors. If you like what you hear, feel free to drop us a small donation. We could use every dollar along the way. And don't forget to catch our other podcasts on thinkradio.ca, because we're not the only ones. We may be the flagship show,
but we're not the only ship
Radio
in the fleet.
Network, but we are not the only ones.
Oh, there's more ships in the fleet.
More ships and more to come. So we will catch you next week right here in the Combat Zone.
Have a great week, guys. See you next week.